What would you do if you discovered that America's most beautiful city had been ruled by creatures who'd been dead for centuries? Tonight, in the heart of New Orleans, a mortal girl is about to discover that some invitations you simply cannot refuse. Settle back comfortably, close your eyes, and follow me through the enchanting streets of the French Quarter. Tonight, I'm going to tell you the story of Celeste, a story where love, mystery, and destiny intertwine in ways that will change everything you thought you knew about what's possible. New Orleans. The city itself is like magic. In the heart of the night, light filtering through wrought iron balconies, footsteps echoing on ancient cobblestone streets, and the scent of jasmine hanging heavy in the air. In this city, past and present dance together, and sometimes that dance is eternal. The Spanish moss whispers secrets older than memory, secrets that have been kept for generations. The gas lamps flicker with more than just flame. They flicker with the memories of lovers who walked these streets centuries ago. And in the shadows between the light, in the spaces where reality grows thin, that's where our story begins. Celeste didn't know, as she stepped off that Greyhound bus on a humid Tuesday evening, that she was walking into a world where fairy tales were dangerously real. She didn't know that the inheritance her grandmother Marie had left her was more than just a beautiful Victorian house on Royal Street. She couldn't have imagined that her quiet life in Chicago was about to become something out of the most romantic and terrifying dreams. But the French Quarter knew. The ancient stones beneath her feet recognized the blood that flowed through her veins. The wrought iron seemed to whisper her name as she passed. And somewhere, in the shadows of St. Louis Cathedral, creatures who had been waiting for decades finally smiled. Celeste Martin was 17 years old, backpack slung over her shoulder, breathing in the humid Louisiana air for the first time in her life. The cold streets of Chicago lay behind her, and before her stretched something she'd only seen in pictures, the heart of New Orleans' French Quarter. "This can't be real," she whispered to herself, her eyes following the colorful lights of Bourbon Street as they painted the evening in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in this maze of history and magic was her grandmother Marie's house, the Victorian mansion she'd only heard about in whispered conversations and faded letters. Marie had passed away when Celeste was just a child, but she had left her this city, both the house and a legacy she didn't yet understand. The air was thick with more than humidity. There was something electric about this place, something that made her skin tingle and her heart race with anticipation she couldn't explain. Every step she took on the uneven sidewalks felt like stepping deeper into a story she was meant to be part of. The architecture around her seemed to breathe with life, balconies dripping with plants, windows glowing warmly behind intricate metalwork, doorways that looked like they led to other worlds entirely. As she walked down Royal Street, pulling her suitcase behind her, Celeste felt eyes on her. Not threatening eyes, but curious ones, as if the very city was taking her measure, deciding whether she belonged here. Street musicians played soft jazz on corners, their melodies weaving through the air like spells. The scent of beignets and coffee mixed with jasmine and something else, something earthy and ancient, that seemed to rise from the very stones beneath her feet. She paused in front of an antique shop, its windows filled with mysterious objects that seemed to shimmer in the lamplight. Old pocket watches, silver jewelry that looked like it had been crafted by fairies, and books. So many old books, with leather covers and titles she couldn't quite read in the dim light. The shop's name was painted in elegant gold script across the window. Moonrise Antiquities. Something about the place called to her, as if an invisible thread was pulling her toward the door. Without quite deciding to do it, she found herself pushing open the heavy wooden door, a brass bell announcing her arrival with a soft, melodic chime. The interior of Moonrise Antiquities was like stepping into a dream. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and vanilla, but underneath that was something else. Something that reminded Celeste of old churches and secret gardens. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with objects that seemed to hold stories within them. Antique mirrors that reflected more than they should, crystal balls that seemed to swirl with inner light, and everywhere, the soft glow of candles that burned without ever seeming to grow shorter. "You're new here," said a voice from behind her, warm and knowing. Celeste turned to see a woman emerging from the shadows between the shelves, perhaps 30 years old, with long dark hair that seemed to move even when there was no breeze, and eyes that held depths Celeste couldn't fathom. She wore flowing fabrics in deep purples and blues, and silver jewelry that chimed softly as she moved. "I'm Margot, and you're Marie's granddaughter." Celeste's heart skipped a beat. "How do you know that?" Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended, almost a whisper in the hushed atmosphere of the shop. Margot's smile deepened, and there was something almost otherworldly about the way her eyes seemed to catch and hold the candlelight. "Child, this is a small city, especially for people like us." Marie was beloved here in the quarter. She had a gift, you see, a way of seeing things that others couldn't. And you? She stepped closer, her movements fluid and graceful as a dancer's. "You have her eyes. Those green eyes are legendary in the French Quarter." Celeste instinctively raised her hand to her chest, feeling her heart racing beneath her fingers. "I don't know much about my grandmother. My family they always stayed quiet about her." "Of course they did," Margot said, her voice gentle but understanding. She reached for an old book from one of the shelves, her fingers trailing over its worn leather cover with reverence. Marie had secrets. In this city, everyone has secrets. But yours are about to be revealed. As Margot's fingers moved across the pages of the ancient book, Celeste felt something shift in the air around them. It was as if the very atmosphere had become charged with electricity, making her skin tingle and her hair stand on end. The candles seemed to burn brighter, casting dancing shadows on the walls that moved in ways that defied the laws of physics she thought she understood. "Tonight," Margot continued, her voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality, "you're going to receive an invitation. When you do—" She looked up from the book, her eyes meeting Celeste's with an intensity that was both comforting and slightly frightening. "Don't refuse it. No matter how strange it seems, no matter how scared you might feel, don't refuse it. Your destiny is calling, Celeste Martin, and destiny doesn't like to be kept waiting. By the time Celeste reached her grandmother's house, the sun was setting behind the buildings of the French Quarter, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. The house stood near the end of Royal Street, on a quieter stretch where the tourist crowds thinned and the real New Orleans began to show itself. It was a 3-story Victorian mansion, painted in soft blues and grays, with wrought iron balconies that curved and twisted like frozen lacework against the evening sky. As she stood on the sidewalk looking up at it, Celeste felt a strange sense of recognition, as if she'd seen this house in dreams she couldn't quite remember. The windows glowed warmly from within, though she knew no one should be home. Vines heavy with night-blooming jasmine climbed the walls, their sweet scent so intense it was almost intoxicating. Spanish moss draped from the ancient oak tree in the front yard like a curtain between worlds. The key turned easily in the lock, as if the house had been expecting her. The door swung open on well-oiled hinges, revealing an interior that took her breath away. The entryway was lit by a crystal chandelier that cast rainbow prisms on the walls, and beyond that, she could see rooms furnished with antiques that looked like they belonged in a museum. Everything was pristine, as if someone had been caring for the house all these years, keeping it ready for her arrival. The living room was a study in elegant comfort. Plush velvet sofas in deep emerald green, Persian rugs that looked like they'd been woven by artists, and bookshelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. But it was the paintings that caught her attention. They covered nearly every wall, depicting scenes of old New Orleans that seemed almost alive in their detail. Garden parties where the guests wore clothing from centuries past, masquerade balls where the dancers seemed to move even when she wasn't looking directly at them, and street scenes that showed the French Quarter as it must have looked when it was young. But there was something about the people in the paintings that made Celeste uneasy. They were all incredibly beautiful, yes, but there was something otherworldly about their beauty. Their skin was too pale, too perfect. Their eyes held depths that seemed impossible, and their smiles revealed teeth that were just a little too sharp, a little too white. Above the fireplace hung the largest painting of all, a portrait of a woman who looked remarkably like Celeste herself, but dressed in the fashion of the 1800s. The nameplate at the bottom read, Marie Evangeline Martin, 1847. But that was impossible. That would make her grandmother over 150 years old. And yet, the resemblance was unmistakable. The same green eyes, the same auburn hair, the same determined set to the jaw that Celeste recognized from her own mirror. On the mantelpiece, positioned as if it had been placed there specifically for her to find, sat an envelope. Heavy parchment, sealed with dark red wax and addressed in flowing script, Miss Celeste Martin. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The paper felt ancient between her fingers, as if it had been crafted from materials that didn't exist anymore. The ink had a strange quality to it, seeming to shimmer between black and deep red depending on how the light hit it. As Celeste read the words, they seemed to burn themselves into her memory with an intensity that was almost physical. Dearest Celeste, the letter began, welcome to the French Quarter. Your grandmother Marie's legacy awaits you here, but it encompasses far more than the beautiful house you now stand in. The time has come for you to learn the truth about your family's history, about the role you were born to play in the ancient tapestry of this magical city. Tonight, at the stroke of 11, there will be a gathering in the garden behind St. Louis Cathedral. This invitation is not optional, though we understand it may seem overwhelming. Your grandmother prepared you for this moment in ways you don't yet realize. The dreams you've had since childhood, the way you sometimes know things before they happen, the feeling that you've never quite fit in with the ordinary world. All of this has been leading to tonight. Do not be afraid. You are among family now, though that family may be unlike anything you've ever imagined. Your place has been waiting for you for 17 years, and we have been waiting just as long to welcome you home. Come to us when the cathedral bells toll 11. Follow the path of moonlight through the garden, and let your heart guide you to where you belong. Your true life begins tonight. With ancient affection and eternal protection, the Rousseau family. Celeste read the letter 3 times, her mind struggling to process what it might mean. The Rousseau family? She'd never heard Marie mention anyone by that name. And what did they mean about dreams and knowing things? It was true that she'd always been different. In Chicago, her friends had learned not to be surprised when she could guess what they were thinking, or when she'd have a feeling about something that turned out to be right. But she'd always assumed everyone experienced things like that. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9:30, its deep notes seeming to vibrate through the house like a heartbeat. She had an hour and a half to decide what to do. Part of her wanted to ignore the letter entirely, to unpack her things and try to live a normal life in this beautiful house. But another part of her, a part that seemed to be growing stronger by the minute, whispered that normal had never been an option for her. She wandered through the house, exploring room after room of elegant furniture and mysterious objects. Marie's bedroom was on the 2nd floor, and it felt like a sanctuary. The bed was covered in silk and velvet, in shades of midnight blue, and the vanity held bottles of perfume that still held their scent after all these years. But it was the wardrobe that truly surprised her. Inside hung dresses that looked like they'd been tailored specifically for Celeste's measurements. Gowns in rich jewel tones, day dresses in flowing fabrics, and evening wear that looked like it belonged in another century. At the very front hung a dress that seemed to call to her, deep midnight blue silk that shimmered with threads of silver, cut in a style that was both timeless and elegant. When she held it up to herself in the mirror, it was as if she was looking at a different person entirely. This dress transformed her from a teenager from Chicago into someone who belonged in the mysterious world the letter had hinted at. At 11:15, Celeste made her decision. She had bathed in Marie's clawfoot tub, using soaps that smelled of jasmine and mysterious herbs. She had dressed carefully in the midnight blue gown, which fit her perfectly and made her feel like she was preparing for the most important night of her life. Her long auburn hair fell in waves down her back, and she wore a silver pendant she'd found in Marie's jewelry box, an intricate piece that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The French Quarter at night was a completely different creature than it had been during the day. The tourist crowds had thinned, leaving the streets to the locals and those who knew how to navigate the city's hidden depths. Gas lamps cast pools of golden light that seemed to create pockets of magic between the shadows. The very air seemed alive with possibility and secrets waiting to be told. As Celeste walked toward St. Louis Cathedral, she became aware that she wasn't alone. Footsteps echoed behind her on the cobblestones, but whenever she turned to look, the street appeared empty. It wasn't threatening exactly, but it was as if the city itself was aware of her journey and was watching to see what would happen next. Street cats appeared and disappeared like smoke, their eyes glowing in the lamplight. Night-blooming flowers released perfumes so intense they were almost narcotic. The cathedral rose before her like a guardian of secrets, its three spires reaching toward a sky full of stars that seemed brighter here than they ever had in Chicago. The building was older than anything she'd ever seen, its stones worn smooth by centuries of weather and witnesses to history she could barely imagine. But it was the garden behind the cathedral that truly took her breath away. Hidden from the street by high walls, covered in climbing roses and jasmine, the garden was a pocket of otherworldly beauty. Ancient oak trees created a canopy overhead, their branches intertwining in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Spanish moss hung like curtains, creating intimate spaces within the larger garden. Stone paths wound between flower beds that bloomed with flowers she couldn't identify, some that seemed to glow with their own inner light, others that appeared to be made of starlight itself. In the center of the garden stood a fountain, its waters catching the moonlight and throwing it back in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. Around the fountain, positioned at precise intervals, stood figures in dark clothing. Even from a distance, Celeste could tell there was something different about them. They stood too still, moved too gracefully, and seemed to belong to the shadows in a way that ordinary people never could. As she approached along the moonlit path, her heart beating so hard she was sure everyone in the garden could hear it, one of the figures stepped forward into the light. "Celeste Martin," said a voice that was like aged whiskey and dark chocolate, rich and smooth and compelling. The man who stepped into the moonlight was perhaps the most elegant person she'd ever seen. Tall and lean, with dark hair that seemed to absorb the light around it, and pale skin that looked like it had been carved from marble. His clothing was impeccable, a dark suit that looked like it had been tailored by masters, and a silver watch chain that caught the light as he moved. But it was his eyes that truly caught her attention. They were dark brown, almost black, but they seemed to hold depths that spoke of centuries of experience. "I am Gabriel Rousseau," he said, inclining his head in a gesture that was both formal and warm. "We have been waiting for you." Celeste found her voice, though it came out smaller than she'd intended. "What do you want from me?" "It's not about what we want," said another voice, this one melodious and feminine. A woman stepped forward from the shadows, and Celeste had to catch her breath. She was stunning in a way that seemed almost impossible. Platinum blonde hair that seemed to glow in the moonlight, skin like porcelain, and eyes the color of winter ice. She wore a gown that looked like it had been woven from moonbeams and shadows, and she moved with a grace that suggested she was dancing even when she was simply walking. "I am Vivienne LeBlanc," the woman said, her smile revealing teeth that were perfect and white and just slightly pointed. "And you, dear child, are finally home." "Home?" Celeste's voice cracked slightly. "I don't understand. What is this place? Who are you people?" Gabriel stepped closer, and Celeste noticed that his footsteps made no sound on the gravel path. "Your grandmother Marie was not an ordinary woman, Celeste. She was one of the most powerful witches in the history of New Orleans. And you carry her blood, her gifts, her destiny." The world seemed to spin around Celeste. "Witch? That's impossible. Witches aren't real." "Aren't they?" Vivian's laugh was like silver bells in the wind. "In this city, child, everything is real. Every story you've ever heard, every legend that's ever been whispered in the dark, they all have roots in truth. And we," Gabriel continued, his voice gentle but matter of fact, "are not ordinary people either. We are vampires, Celeste, and we have been the guardians of this city for over 1,000 years." Celeste felt her knees go weak. Vampires? But that's from movies, from books. "Is it?" Vivian moved closer, and Celeste could see that her beauty was indeed otherworldly. "Haven't you always known, somewhere deep inside, that the world was more magical than people pretended? Haven't you always felt different, special, like you could see things others couldn't?" And it was true. Celeste had always felt like there was something just beyond the edge of her vision, something wonderful and terrible and magical that the ordinary world refused to acknowledge. In Chicago, she'd learned to hide the fact that she sometimes knew things she shouldn't know, that she could feel the emotions of people around her, that her dreams sometimes showed her things that later came true. "The gifts you've always had," Gabriel said, as if reading her thoughts. "They're not accidents. They're your inheritance from Marie. She was the bridge between our world and the mortal world, the one who kept the balance. And now that she's gone, the balance is threatened," Vivian finished. "And you are the only one who can restore it." "I don't understand," Celeste whispered, wrapping her arms around herself as if she could hold herself together through sheer will. "What balance? What are you talking about?" Gabriel gestured toward the benches arranged around the fountain, and Celeste found herself sitting without quite remembering how she'd gotten there. The stone was warm beneath her, as if it had been absorbing sunlight all day, though the night was cool. "New Orleans is not like other cities," Gabriel began, his voice taking on the cadence of someone telling a story that had been told many times before. "It sits at the intersection of many worlds, the world of the living and the world of the dead, the world of magic and the world of ordinary mortals. For centuries, this intersection has been protected by powerful magic, spells that keep the supernatural forces in balance." Vivian settled gracefully onto the bench beside Celeste, and despite everything, her presence was oddly comforting. "Your grandmother Marie was the keeper of those spells. Her family has held that responsibility for over 200 years, passing the knowledge and the power from mother to daughter, grandmother to granddaughter. But my mother, Celeste started to protest. Your mother chose the ordinary world, Gabriel said gently. She rejected her heritage, married a mortal man, and moved far from New Orleans. It was her choice to make, but it meant that the responsibility would fall to you. Celeste felt overwhelmed, as if the weight of centuries was settling on her shoulders. But I don't know anything about magic. I can't even... I sometimes have feelings about things, but that's not the same as being a witch. Isn't it? Vivian smiled and reached out to touch Celeste's hand. The moment their skin made contact, Celeste felt a jolt of energy run through her. It was as if every nerve in her body suddenly came alive, as if she could feel the life force of every plant in the garden, every creature moving in the shadows. Your power is there, Vivian said softly. It's been waiting for you to come home, to accept who you really are. Marie left you more than just a house, Celeste. She left you a legacy, a purpose, and a family who will protect you as you learn to use the gifts you were born with. What kind of gifts? Celeste asked, though part of her was afraid to know the answer. Gabrielle exchanged a look with Vivian before answering. You can communicate with spirits, influence the emotions and thoughts of others, see glimpses of the future, and, with training, you can work magic that will help maintain the balance between the supernatural and mortal worlds. The spirits of New Orleans have been waiting for you, Vivian added. The dead who walk in the cemeteries, the ghosts who linger in the old buildings, the ancient powers that sleep beneath the city, they all recognize Marie's bloodline. They're all waiting to see if you'll accept the role you were born to play. Before Celeste could respond, she heard footsteps approaching from another part of the garden. These footsteps were different from Gabriel's silent movements. They had weight and purpose, and something about them made her heart start racing again. Ah, Gabriel said, a note of something like caution entering his voice. And here comes the one who will complicate everything. Sebastian stood from his position on the fountain's edge, and suddenly the atmosphere in the garden changed. Where before there had been an air of mysterious welcome, now there was something more serious, more urgent. The truth is, Celeste, Sebastian began, his voice losing its earlier lightness. New Orleans is in danger. For the past 50 years, Marie's magic has kept certain unsavory elements away from our city. But her death has created a power vacuum, and there are those who would exploit it. Gabriel stepped forward, his expression grave. There are other supernatural communities, other vampire clans, who have long coveted New Orleans. Our city sits at a convergence of ley lines that makes it incredibly powerful from a magical standpoint. Control New Orleans, and you can influence supernatural events across the entire continent. And right now, Vivian added, her beautiful face marred by worry, the magical barriers that have protected us are failing. Without Marie to maintain them, they're growing weaker every day. Celeste felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. And you think I can... what? Replace her? Not replace, Dante said quietly. speaking for the first time since the introductions. But you can renew the barriers. You have Marie's blood, her genetic connection to the magic that built this city's defenses. With training, with the right guidance, you could save us all, Sebastian finished. But the training won't be easy, and it won't be safe. The enemies I mentioned, they know about you now. They know you're here, and they know what you represent. They'll try to stop you from coming into your full power. Celeste sank back onto the bench, overwhelmed. I never asked for any of this. I just wanted to start college, maybe study art history, live a normal life. Normal was never really an option for you, Vivian said gently, sitting beside her again. Haven't you always felt different? Haven't you always known that there was something more waiting for you? And it was true. Even in Chicago, surrounded by the most ordinary life she could imagine, Celeste had always felt like she was waiting for something. She'd gone through the motions of teenage life, school, friends, planning for college, but it had all felt like a costume she was wearing, a role she was playing until her real life could begin. What kind of training? She asked finally. Gabriel smiled, and for the first time since she'd arrived in the garden, he looked genuinely pleased. Magic, obviously. Learning to communicate with spirits, to see through the veil between worlds, to work with the natural energies that flow through this city. And self-defense, Sebastian added, his expression more serious. If our enemies come for you, you'll need to be able to protect yourself. I can teach you that, Dante said, and something in his voice made Celeste look up at him sharply. There was an intensity in his gaze that both thrilled and frightened her. Sebastian raised an eyebrow. Dante, you're hardly the most stable choice for a teacher. I'm the most qualified, Dante replied, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. I've fought more battles than the rest of you combined. And you've lost control more times than the rest of us combined, Vivian said pointedly. What do you mean, lost control? Celeste asked, looking between them. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken history. Finally, Gabriel spoke. Dante's transformation into a vampire was traumatic, more so than most. It left him with certain volatility issues. Volatility issues? Celeste repeated. Dante's jaw tightened. I sometimes have difficulty controlling my supernatural strength when I'm emotionally compromised. He's dangerous when he cares about someone, Sebastian said bluntly, and given the way he's been looking at you since he arrived. I can control myself, Dante said, his voice deadly quiet. Can you? Sebastian challenged. Because the last time you cared about someone. Enough. Dante's voice carried such authority that even Sebastian fell silent. My past is my own concern. Celeste needs training, and I'm the best qualified to provide it. Despite the obvious tension, despite the warnings, Celeste found herself saying, I want Dante to teach me. 3 nights later, Dante came to Marie's house, just as the last light was fading from the sky. Celeste had spent the intervening time exploring her inheritance more thoroughly, reading through Marie's journals and trying to understand the legacy that had been left to her. The journals were fascinating and terrifying in equal measure, filled with spells and recipes and detailed accounts of supernatural events in New Orleans dating back over a century. But it was the more recent entries that truly captured her attention. Marie had been preparing for Celeste's arrival for years, leaving detailed instructions about her training, about the allies she could trust, and about the dangers she would face. And in nearly every entry from the past decade, one name appeared again and again: Dante. He is the most dangerous of them, Marie had written, but also the most loyal. His darkness comes from great love, lost, and perhaps it will take another great love to heal him. When Dante arrived that evening, Celeste was waiting for him on the front porch, dressed in clothes suitable for whatever mysterious training he had planned. He looked different than he had in the formal setting of the cathedral garden. Less formal, more approachable, but somehow even more compelling. "Are you ready?" he asked, extending his hand to help her down the front steps. "As ready as someone can be for something they don't understand," she replied, accepting his assistance and trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened at his touch. Dante led her through the winding streets of the French Quarter, pointing out details she might have missed during her first few days in the city. Here was the building where Marie had once maintained a shop. There was the alley where a particularly powerful voodoo priestess had once lived. Every block seemed to hold layers of history, both mundane and magical. Their destination turned out to be St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, the oldest cemetery in New Orleans. In the darkness, the above-ground tombs looked like a city in miniature. White marble and stone structures, creating narrow streets between them. Spanish moss hung from the ancient trees like curtains, and the air was thick with the scent of flowers and something else. Something that spoke of age and secrets, and the thin places where the living world touched the realm of the dead. "Why here?" Celeste asked as they walked between the tombs. "Because," Dante said, his voice soft in the hushed atmosphere of the cemetery. "This is where the veil is thinnest. Here, you can truly connect with your gifts." As they walked deeper into the cemetery, Celeste began to feel something changing around her. The air seemed to shimmer, and she could swear she saw figures moving between the tombs, translucent figures that disappeared when she looked directly at them. "Do you see them?" Dante asked, watching her face carefully. I think so," Celeste whispered. "Are they—" "Spirits," Dante confirmed. "The dead who remain tied to this place. They've been waiting for you, Celeste. They recognize Marie's bloodline." Suddenly, the temperature dropped dramatically. Celeste's breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the nearby flowers. Dante immediately moved closer to her, his body tense with alertness. "That's not supposed to happen," he said, his voice tight with concern. From the shadows between the tombs, a new voice spoke, cold, ancient, and filled with malice. "Well, well, Marie's little granddaughter has finally come home." Celeste spun around, her heart racing, as a figure emerged from the darkness. This was no ordinary vampire. Where Gabriel, Vivienne, Sebastian, and Dante all maintained some semblance of humanity in their appearance, this being looked like death itself. Its skin was corpse pale, its eyes were completely black, and when it smiled, its teeth were not just pointed but razor sharp. "Dante Salvador," the creature continued, its voice like ice cracking. "Still playing protector, I see. How predictable." Dante moved to stand between Celeste and the creature, and she could see his muscles coiling beneath his clothes, preparing for a fight. "Morrigan," he said, his voice deadly calm. "You're not welcome here." "Oh, but I am," the creature, Morrigan, replied with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. The old protections are failing, boy. The barriers that kept my kind away from this delicious little city are crumbling. And this girl, its black eyes fixed on Celeste with hunger that made her blood run cold. This girl is the key to everything. Run, Dante said quietly to Celeste, never taking his eyes off Morrigan. But run, now. Before Celeste could move, Morrigan disappeared, simply vanished, like smoke. A heartbeat later, it reappeared directly behind her, its cold fingers brushing against her neck. Too late, it whispered in her ear. You smell just like your grandmother. Power and innocy, such a delectable combination. Dante moved faster than humanly possible, grabbing Morrigan and throwing it away from Celeste with superhuman strength. The creature slammed into a marble tomb with a sound like thunder, cracking the stone. But Morrigan only laughed as it picked itself up, apparently uninjured. Is that the best you can do? Age has made you weak, Dante. Love has made you weak. Get away from her, Dante growled, and Celeste saw his eyes flash with an inner light that was both beautiful and terrifying. Oh, I will, Morrigan said, brushing dust from its dark clothing. For now. But I wanted the girl to know that I'm coming for her, that we're all coming for her. The old order is ending, little witch, and when it does, the creature's form began to dissolve again, becoming shadows and mist. When it does, its voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. The city will run red with blood, starting with everyone you care about. The shadows rushed toward them like a living thing, and Dante threw himself over Celeste, shielding her with his body. She felt his arms around her, felt his supernatural strength protecting her, and for a moment that felt like eternity, she was surrounded by darkness and the scent of danger and the overwhelming presence of the man who was risking everything to keep her safe. Then the shadows were gone, and they were alone in the cemetery again. But the temperature remained frigid, and frost covered everything around them like a warning. Dante pulled back to look at her, his eyes still carrying that supernatural glow. Are you hurt? No, Dante, what was that thing? His expression was grim as he helped her to her feet. That was one of the ancient ones, the creatures that ruled this continent before humans arrived, before even my kind arrived. They're old, powerful, and completely without mercy. And they want me? They want what you represent, Dante said, taking her hand and leading her quickly toward the cemetery exit. The power to break down all the barriers between the supernatural and mortal worlds. If they can corrupt you, turn you to their side. What would happen? Dante stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen it. The end of everything. Not just New Orleans, but the entire balance that keeps supernatural forces from overrunning the world. Celeste felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a physical thing. So what do? We train you faster than anyone has ever been trained before, Dante said. We unlock your full power before they can make their next move, and we pray that it's enough. As they walked back toward the French Quarter, Celeste couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched from every shadow, every darkened window, every space between the streetlights. The game had begun, and she was the prize they were all fighting for. But what terrified her most wasn't the ancient ones or the danger that was coming. What terrified her most was the way her heart had raced when Dante had thrown himself over her to protect her, and the growing certainty that her feelings for him were going to make everything infinitely more complicated. As they reached the edge of the French Quarter, Dante suddenly stopped. His entire body went rigid, and his eyes began scanning the shadows with predatory intensity. "What is it?" Celeste whispered. "They're here," he said quietly. "More of them. They've been waiting for us." Before Celeste could ask what he meant, she heard it. A sound like wind through dead leaves, but there was no wind. The sound was coming from above them, from the rooftops and balconies that lined the street. "How many?" she asked, surprised by how calm her own voice sounded. "Too many," Dante replied grimly. "Celeste, listen to me very carefully. In about 30 seconds, I'm going to create a distraction. When I do, I want you to run straight to Gabriel's house. It's the blue building with the white balconies on Chartres Street. Don't look back, don't stop for anything, and don't trust anyone except Gabriel, Vivienne, or Sebastian." "What about you?" Dante turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her heart clench with fear. Not fear for herself, but fear for him. "I'll hold them off as long as I can," he said simply. "No," Celeste said immediately. "We go together, or we don't go at all." Dante's expression softened, and for a moment he looked almost human again. "Celeste." "No," she repeated firmly. "I may be new to this world, but I'm not helpless, and I'm not leaving you." Before Dante could respond, the attack began. Shadows poured down from the buildings around them like a black waterfall, taking the forms of creatures that looked like Morrigan, but worse, older, more twisted, hungrier. Dante immediately shifted into something that was barely recognizable as the man she'd been falling for. His movements became fluid and deadly, his strength clearly superhuman, as he fought the creatures with a grace and power that was both beautiful and terrifying to watch. But there were so many of them, and as Celeste watched Dante fighting for both their lives, she felt something awakening inside her, something that had been sleeping, waiting for exactly this moment. Power flowed through her veins like liquid fire, and suddenly she could see the creatures not just as they appeared, but as they truly were, beings of pure malevolence and hunger. Without quite knowing what she was doing, Celeste raised her hands and light poured from her fingers, not the gentle glow she'd produced in the cathedral garden, but something fierce and bright and dangerous. The creatures shrieked and recoiled from the light, and for a moment she and Dante had breathing room. "How did you do that?" Dante asked, his voice full of amazement. "I don't know," Celeste admitted. "It just happened." But their reprieve was short-lived. More shadows were gathering, and these were bigger, older, more powerful than the first wave. And from somewhere in the darkness, Morrigan's voice echoed through the night. "You cannot run forever, little witch. We have all the time in the world, and you are only human." That's when Celeste felt it, a presence so ancient and powerful that it made Morrigan feel like a child by comparison. Something was coming, something that dwarfed everything they'd faced so far. The temperature dropped so dramatically that the very air began to crystallize around them. And Dante, looking more afraid than she'd ever seen him, whispered a single word that made her blood freeze in her veins. "Impossible." What has Dante recognized in the approaching darkness? What ancient power have Celeste's newfound abilities awakened? And will their growing love be enough to survive the supernatural storm that's about to break over New Orleans? Find out in part 2 of Chronicles of the French Quarter, where Celeste will discover the true extent of her powers. Dante's darkest secrets will be revealed, and the battle for New Orleans and their hearts will truly begin. Sweet dreams, dear listeners, if you can manage to sleep after tonight's revelations. The story continues soon, and the greatest adventures in love and magic are yet to come. Until then, may your own dreams be filled with mysterious strangers and cities full of magic.